The funeral of Marco Rios was always going to be a tense affair, considering the sheer volume of secrets and lies floating around Port Charles right now, but nobody could have predicted the absolute seismic shockwave that was about to be unleashed among the mourners standing in the damp grass. Sonny Corinthos showing up to pay his respects was a bold move in and of itself because Jen Sidwell has been loudly and violently blaming the mob boss for the brutal stabbing that left Marco bleeding out on the floor of Alexis Davis's law office. You have to understand the sheer audacity of Sonny walking into that cemetery wearing his impeccably tailored dark suit with his head held high and a look of genuine solemn respect on his face, while the man who was sworn to destroy him stands just feet away glaring daggers at him. It was a scene ripped straight out of a classic mob movie where the lines between enemy and family blur into a messy puddle of grief and vengeance. Lucas Jones was there weeping openly for the man he loved and lost completely unaware of the massive Shakespearean tragedy unfolding right behind him as he mourned the senseless violence that took Marco away from him. Marco died trying to be a hero for Britt Westbourne by stealing those Huntington's medication vials from the Windermere safe only to have Ross Cullum smash them and end his life, leaving Lucas to operate on the very man who killed his boyfriend. That alone is enough trauma to sustain a soap opera for a decade, but the writers decided to push the envelope so far off the table that it shattered into a million pieces on the floor because the real story wasn't about Lucas or Cullum or even Britt's missing meds. The real story was about the quiet, terrifying moment when Jen Sidwell stepped away from the casket and walked directly up to Sonny Corinthos. Everyone in that cemetery probably held their breath expecting a shootout or a screaming match or at the very least a physical altercation that would require the PCPD to intervene, but Sidwell didn't raise his voice or pull a weapon. He just leaned in close to Sonny and delivered a piece of information so devastating and so completely out of left field that it fundamentally rewrote the history of General Hospital going back 3 decades. Sidwell looked Sonny dead in the eye and told him that Marco Rios wasn't his son at all. Marco was Sonny's biological son. Just let that sink in for a minute, because the implications are so massive they threaten to swallow the entire town of Port Charles whole. Sidwell knew. He knew this entire time that nearly 30 years ago, Sonny Corinthos and Natalia Ramirez had a secret, passionate, illicit affair that resulted in a pregnancy. Sidwell raised that boy knowing that the blood of his greatest rival was pumping through his veins, and he kept that secret locked away tighter than the cold fusion prototype in the Windermere catacombs until the exact moment when it would inflict the maximum amount of psychological torture on Sonny. It is a level of villainy that goes beyond mere mob violence or corporate espionage, because this is soul-crushing emotional warfare designed to break a man from the inside out. Sonny's face in that moment must have been a study in absolute cognitive dissonance, as his brain tried to process the fact that the young man he is currently being framed for murdering was actually his own flesh and blood. He has spent the last few weeks bracing for Sidwell's retaliation, preparing to use Rick Lansing as his legal shield against the inevitable murder charges that Ross Cullum is trying to pin on him. Sonny thought this was just another turf war, just another misunderstanding involving the WSB and rogue agents, and collateral damage, but suddenly it is the most deeply personal tragedy of his entire life. He didn't even know Marco. He didn't get to watch him grow up, or teach him how to ride a bike, or protect him from the dangers of the world. He just watched him die from afar, and now he has to stand at his funeral realizing that he lost a piece of himself that he never even knew he had. The sheer cruelty of Sidwell revealing this information while standing over Marco's dead body is staggering. Sidwell essentially told Sonny that he stole his legacy, raised him in the shadow of the Sidwell Empire, and then watched him get slaughtered, only to use that slaughter as a weapon to destroy Sonny's life. It is twisted and sick and brilliantly soapy all at the same time. Think about the timeline here and how it completely recontextualizes everything we know about Natalia Ramirez and her connection to Port Charles. 30 years ago, Sonny was building his empire, making enemies and taking lovers, and Natalia was right there in the thick of it, keeping a secret that would eventually cost her son his life. Did Natalia know that Sidwell knew? Was she trapped in a web of blackmail and fear, unable to tell Sonny the truth because she knew the kind of violence it would unleash? The history between Sonny and Natalia has always been murky, but this revelation shines a blinding spotlight on the dark corners of their past. Sidwell has been parading around Port Charles, acting like the grieving father demanding justice and promising vengeance, but his grief is tainted by this toxic secret. He didn't just lose a son, he lost the ultimate pawn in his lifelong chess match against Sonny Corinthos. And now he is using the ghost of that pawn to checkmate the mob boss. The tragic irony of this entire situation is so thick you could cut it with a knife. Ross Cullum, the dirty WSB director who is currently drifting in and out of consciousness in the GHICU, is the man who actually plunged the knife into Marco's chest. Cullum killed Marco because Marco stole Britt's medication. Cullum is framing Sonny for the murder to cover his own tracks and protect the César Faison cold fusion project. Sonny is being set up to take the fall for the murder of his own biological son by a man who is currently being kept alive by the medical expertise of that son's grieving boyfriend. It is a circle of suffering so perfectly constructed that it almost feels cruel to subject the characters to it. Lucas Jones stood in Trauma 1 and fought with every ounce of his skill to keep Cullum's heart beating, completely unaware that the blood on Cullum's hands belonged to Marco. And now Lucas will eventually have to find out not only that he saved his lover's killer, but that his lover was the secret heir to the Corinthos crime family. How does a person even begin to process that kind of trauma? Lucas has already been through so much with the loss of his adoptive father Tony and the endless drama surrounding his family, but this is a betrayal on a cosmic level. When Sonny fully digests this information, the fallout is going to be apocalyptic. We all know how fiercely protective Sonny is of his children. Look at how he treats Christina and Dante and Michael and Avery and Donna. Family is the only thing that truly matters to Sonny Corinthos, and discovering that he had a son out there who was murdered before they could ever truly know each other is going to ignite a fire inside him that no one in Port Charles will be able to extinguish. He isn't just going to want to clear his name with Rick Lansing's help anymore. He is going to want blood. He is going to want to tear Ross Cullum apart with his bare hands, and he is going to want to dismantle Jen Sidwell's entire life piece by piece. Sidwell may think he has the upper hand by dropping this emotional nuclear bomb on Sonny, but he has severely miscalculated the kind of monster he has just woken up. A grieving Sonny is a dangerous Sonny, but a Sonny who has been robbed of his child by a web of lies and WSB corruption is a force of nature that will destroy everything in its path. And what about the rest of the Corinthos family? How are they going to react to the news that there was another sibling out there all along? Dante Falconeri is already drowning in stress trying to manage the PCPD, dealing with the fallout of the Pier 55 shooting, completely unaware that his own son Rocco is the one who shot Cullum. Now Dante is going to find out he had a half-brother who was murdered right under his nose. Michael is going to have to grapple with the fact that the family tree just got even more complicated while he is busy defending Jacinda Bracken from the judgment of the Quartermaines. Christina, who is already spiraling and trying to find her place in the world, is going to be hit with the realization that her father's past is still producing ghosts that haunt their present. The sheer volume of secret children in Port Charles is a running joke among the residents, but this one feels different because it ends in such senseless, brutal tragedy. Marco didn't come to town to claim his birthright or take over the mob. He came to town wrapped up in Sidwell's schemes, fell in love with Lucas, tried to do a good deed for Britt Westbourne, and got slaughtered for it. Britt Westbourne is going to carry the weight of this guilt for the rest of her life. Marco died trying to get her the Huntington's medication that Cullum eventually destroyed anyway. Marco's death was completely in vain, and now Britt has to live with the knowledge that her brother's biological son died trying to save her life. Wait, Marco is Sonny's son, not Faison's, but the interconnected web of guilt remains the same. Britt is already terrified and planning to flee to Canada with Jason Morgan, but this revelation is going to anchor her to the tragedy in Port Charles. Jason is currently sitting in a WSB transport van taking the fall for Rocco's crime, and when he finds out that Sonny's secret son was murdered by the very man Jason was trying to kill the entire dynamic of their friendship, and their mission is going to shift. Jason was willing to sacrifice his freedom for Dante's son, but will he be able to watch Sonny tear himself apart over the loss of Marco? The funeral scene was a masterclass in unspoken tension. The rain falling on the black umbrellas, the stoic faces of the mourners, the absolute devastation radiating from Lucas, and right in the middle of it all, Jen Sidwell leaning in to whisper a truth that shatters the universe. Sonny standing there in the damp grass, the realization washing over him like a tidal wave. The anger, the grief, the confusion, all warring for dominance on his face. He came to pay respects to an enemy's son and found out he was burying his own. It is the kind of storytelling that makes you scream at the television because it is so unfair and so brilliant. You have to wonder how long Sidwell planned this moment. Did he wait until Marco was dead to tell Sonny because it would hurt more? Or did he always plan to use Marco as a weapon against Sonny eventually, and Cullum's knife just forced his hand? The twisted psychology of a man who would raise his enemy's child just to use him as collateral damage is terrifying. Sidwell isn't just a mob boss or a criminal mastermind. He is a psychological sadist who feeds on the pain of others. And Natalia. We have to talk about Natalia. The ghost of this woman is now hovering over Port Charles, dictating the actions of the most powerful men in town. What kind of relationship did she really have with Sonny 30 years ago? Was it a fleeting romance or something deeper? Why did she hide the pregnancy? Did Sidwell force her to keep quiet, or did she think she was protecting Marco from the violence of Sonny's world? By keeping him away from Sonny, she inadvertently placed him in the crosshairs of Faison's legacy and the WSB's corruption. There is no escaping the danger in Port Charles, it just takes different forms. Marco thought he was untouchable because he was Sidwell's son. He told Lucas that Cullum wouldn't dare touch him without proof because of Sidwell's wrath. He was so tragically wrong. He underestimated the desperation of a cornered animal like Ross Cullum, and he paid for it with his life. As the dirt is thrown on Marco's casket, the real war is just beginning. Sonny Corinthos is not going to let this go. He is going to use every resource at his disposal to uncover the truth about Marco's death. When he connects the dots that Lucas and Britt have already connected, when he realizes that Cullum is the one who wielded the knife, the WSB is going to have a bloodbath on its hands. Jack Brennan is already losing patience with his rogue agents and trying to manage the fallout, but he cannot manage the wrath of a grieving Sonny Corinthos. Brennan warned Jocelyn that there is a traitor in the WSB and that Cullum is dangerous, but he has no idea that Cullum just painted a massive target on his own back by murdering the secret heir to the Corinthos Empire. The collision course between Sonny Sidwell, Cullum, and the WSB is going to leave Port Charles in ruins. This is why we watch. We watch for the moments when a single whispered sentence at a gloomy funeral changes the trajectory of a dozen lives. We watch for the messy human emotions, the grief, the rage, the impossible choices. Sonny Corinthos has survived bombings and shootings and betrayals and amnesia, but surviving the knowledge that he failed to protect a son he never knew he had might be the thing that finally breaks him, or it might be the thing that forges him into something even more dangerous. The coming weeks are going to be a descent into darkness as Sonny navigates this fresh hell, and Sidwell watches his handiwork unfold. The board has been reset, the pieces have been moved, and the game is deadlier than ever. Marco Rios may be in the ground, but his legacy as the Lost Corinthos is just beginning to tear this town apart.